Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Comics Cube. I'm Paul, and I'm here with Duy and LaMar. And today we are going to talk about Alan Moore's very first Superman stories. So, if I asked you, what are Alan Moore's very first published Superman stories, you might think to yourself, oh, well, it was The Jungle Line in DC Comics Presents. And you might even say it in that voice. But you'd be wrong. And if you said For the Man Who Has Everything, you'd be wrong. And if you said Whatever Happened to the Man of Tomorrow, you'd be wrong. Because Alan Moore wrote two Superman stories for some British annuals that I have here. Now, to give
I
you
like how the second one says official.
Yeah, they're official, baby.
Because the first one is totally fake.
Yeah. So, just a bit of background. Here in the United Kingdom, we have every Christmas we get these annuals published, and usually they'll just reprint some American stories. But maybe not so much anymore. But back in the day, there's some like filler stories, some prose stories, and they're usually written by like British writers. And I didn't really start getting them till like '88, so I kind of missed out on all that sort of British wave of comics creators just before they went over to the States, to the American comics, contributing to these annuals. Now, Grant Morrison has written for these annuals. He's written some amazing stories. You've got loads of amazing artists like Bryan Talbot and Steve Dillon and Brian Bolland. And also, you've got Alan Moore. Alan Moore writes a prose story in here called Protected Species in the Superheroes Annual 1984. This would have come out at the end of 1983. And he also wrote I Was Superman's Double in this annual, Superman Annual 1985, official, yeah. And that would have come out at the end of 1984. Now, around that time, he would have already started Miracle Man and V for Vendetta.
Marvel Man.
Marvel Man, I beg your pardon. Marvel Man and V for Vendetta. He would have just been on the cusp of starting Swamp Thing. He started that in '84, I believe. And so by the time he wrote this, he may well have also started writing the anatomy lesson, which is quite exciting. And but he hadn't written The Jungle Line. He hadn't written For the Man Who Has Everything, and he certainly hadn't written Whatever Happened to the Man of Tomorrow. So these are Alan Moore's first published Superman stories. And we've read them, and we're going to talk about them.
Thanks to the magic of the internet and the fact that they're only a total of 5 pages long. Yes. Paul took pictures and sent them to us.
So I'm just going to introduce you to them. I'm not going to show you the whole thing. But you've got Protected Species here. And the art is by, I believe it's by
Bryan Talbot.
Bryan Talbot, yeah. And you've also got
a supremely underrated artist, by the way, Bryan Talbot.
Yes, he's fantastic, yeah. You've also got I Was Superman's Double in the '85 annual, and the artwork there is by a man called Bob Wakelin,
who I have never heard of before this.
I think he's quite a well-established artist, or he was quite a well-established artist in his own right, but I don't believe he did that much comics. So, yeah.
Interesting.
But I wasn't familiar with him until recently either. Now, my first question to Duy and LaMar. Let's start with Duy and then focus on LaMar. I'm going to ask you, if you read both of these stories and I didn't tell you it was Alan Moore, do you think you would have guessed it was Alan Moore writing it, Duy?
The first one, yeah. That one's got his 2000 AD imprints all over it. The second one, so that's Protected Species, because it was, it does everything, including all of that wordplay that early Alan Moore like doing. I mean, later Alan Moore likes doing it too, but early Alan Moore loved doing it so much. You could see it in a lot of his 2080 work. I think I told you off the air at this same point in time I think he was already starting work on DR and Quinch. And I think you could absolutely see this as a DR and Quinch story. The second one, no, I don't think I would have. I think
Mm,
it's pretty far from I don't really see a lot of Moorisms in it. I would have never guessed it.
yeah. LaMar, what do you think?
Same thing as what Dewey laid out. Like the first one, you could kind of see it, you know, not necessarily if you're thinking like some of the other superhero stuff he's done, maybe not. But if you look at some of the other stuff, that he's done besides his superhero work that we're familiar with, you're like, oh yeah, that's him. But like the second one, number one, I wasn't familiar with the artist, you know, and sometimes is I don't know this, because the art and the story is supposed to connect. So sometimes you can get clues on who writes something, sometimes just in the way that the artist is asked to draw stuff. And so, but I wasn't getting anything from that, you know. But when I was reading the story, there were some things where I would probably have been like, hey, maybe this guy's like an Alan Moore fan or something, maybe, but not so much, you know.
What about you,
Yeah.
Paul?
Well, yeah, I maybe with the first one, like you say, but then it's quite sort of, in a lot of ways, it's quite typical of like 80s sci-fi, the first one, Protected
Mm-hmm.
Species. So a bit of background for the viewer. The story, The Protected Species, is from the perspective of an alien sort of bounty hunter type person whose job it is to round up endangered animals for this sort of galactic Save the Animals organization. And he's writing to them and saying, I've had a guts full of doing this because I've just been to Earth to round up the two last Kryptonians, and the male Kryptonian kicked my ass. So that's basically the gist of it. But it's quite typical of 80s sci-fi in this, and that kind of 2000 AD stuff, in that it's got that sort of sci-fi slang, isn't it? That sort of this fracking alien. I waited.
Strontium breath.
Yeah, that's it. So I think I maybe would have identified it as a 2000 AD writer.
100% a 2000 AD writer.
Yeah, but I don't know if I would have immediately said Alan Moore.
I'll tell you
But I
one
think
thing that makes it absolutely Alan Moore. The first line of this is to Plusiturf need president, Interstellar League of Gentlefolk.
there we go. Oh, a little foreshadowing of things to come there.
It's Interstellar League of Gentlefolk concerned about endangered wildlife, but I stopped it right there.
Yeah.
Prove my point. Okay.
So before let's focus.
Wait. So the second one, you would not have guessed it at all, right?
Yeah, the second one. Okay, so just a bit of background there. It's from the perspective of a taxi driver, and he's taking someone across Metropolis in his taxi, and he's telling this tall tale about how the president Ronald Reagan asked him to fill in for Superman because the real Superman had had a nervous breakdown, and they searched on a computer for the person with the best qualities to replace Superman, and they found this taxi driver. And so there's this whole thing about how the taxi driver goes to the White House and Superman's cowering in the corner, clutching a teddy bear. And they give the taxi driver superpowers, and he fights an alien menace, and they let him keep the powers, but he goes back to driving taxis just because. And it becomes apparent that the person he's telling this tall tale to is Clark Kent. That's the twist.
It's not so much of a twist because Clark is there in the drawing in the first page.
Yeah, it's a really obvious twist. Yeah.
Good job, Bob Wakelin.
Yeah. but it's what I find interesting about both these stories is that they're both from the outsider's perspective. You know, they're not like Superman is not the first person in this story. He's not the central figure of this story. It's all about like other people
Mhm.
and how Superman has affected them and the world in which Superman inhabits. Do you think that is quite typical of Alan Moore, LaMar?
Um, yeah, I think so, but it's interesting because you have like these, like in his other works, you know, that he's known for having these like segues in between chapters or in between books where, you know, like a character's reading over a dossier or they're reading a letter or something like that, but the character's not seen. It's actually you reading the letter, so you're in the driver's seat. So uh both of these stories have that same kind of element to it, but like the first one especially, because literally you're actually, you know, reading a message that the bounty hunter sent to, you know, the people that sent him there to get the Kryptonians or whatever. And in the second one, it's like you're in the cab in the back seat with Clark while this guy's talking to him, you know. So so it's you're
You even hear it with
yeah,
his accent, right? With the accent,
yeah,
like where to, buddy?
yeah,
Where?
yeah. Like you know, you can hear it, you know, so it's like you're there, you know. And honestly, you know, it's not something that's easy to do because a lot of people try it and they stumble with it. Like it's something you have to structure properly, you know, to get that feeling and to keep it there, you know, even though it's only, you know, 2 pages for the first one, 3 for the second one. But it's not easy to do. And you know, he nailed it with both of these here, you know.
I find it fascinating because the whole thing about focusing on the other people, that is an Alan Moore thing. Like that's totally a Watchmen thing. That's totally a V for Vendetta thing. But it's not an Alan Moore Superman thing.
Right.
Mm.
Alan Moore Superman stories are pretty Superman centric. So
Yeah.
it's weird, huh? That's weird.
I don't know though, because like even you know, with the jungle line, Swamp Thing's the hero of that story,
Well, it's
isn't he?
because it's a team up.
Yeah. And for the man who has everything, yeah, it is Superman centric, but Robin saves the day, you know?
Still a misstep, Alan, I think.
Yeah. And what's the other one? Oh yeah, I suppose like I guess like whatever happened to the Man of Tomorrow, there's that you know focus on Superman's world and how he's affected the wider world around him and the people around him as well, but maybe not so much. Yeah.
Yeah, not so much
I
as in his other works, I would say.
yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah, that is true.
Mhm.
Although, like, I never realized the connection, like, until Lamar just said it, that the first story, Protected Species, yeah, it's the kind of thing that might come up in the Black Dossier, isn't it? You know, like these letters, emails, and messages that have been collated. Yeah.
Just as a side note to everyone, the Black Dossier is an excellent piece of work. So
Yeah.
anyone
Yeah,
who
yeah.
drops off League at Black Dossier, you're missing out. Okay.
Yeah. Absolutely. So, yeah, Protected Species then. Um, did you like it? I don't think I've actually asked that yet. Duy, did you actually like it?
I love it because everyone knows I'm a big fan of dad jokes and puns. So all of this stuff about the etymology, you know, just all of this language wordplay, like uh you sent me out to Sol 3, which has to be one of the most depressing places in known space. So obviously Sol 3 is the third planet from the sun. You can tell that by the name the locals have for their own planet. They called it dirt, or was that mud? I don't remember. Which is like, yeah, like if you were an alien and you were translating the word that to us means Earth, in your translator, it could show up as planet mud. It could show up as planet dirt. This is why we're terrible at naming things. The Sahara Desert literally means desert. The Avon River literally means river. And if an alien like this showed up and used it on that stuff, he would be so confused.
Yeah.
But I love that stuff, and I love that stuff. I love because it makes sense. It's funny. It's true and it's funny, and it shows how ridiculous some things are. And then also I like the idea that I like the idea that he's just doing his job. He's like, I'm looking for endangered species, and these are endangered species because he's not seeing them as equals. He's seeing them as something that he has to do for his job. And then he's like, all right, in my line of business, I find that female animals are bigger and more dangerous. So I'm going to go after the dude first. That's hilarious. So yes, I think it's safe to say that I love protected species. I would have liked to see this as a short comic too. It would be really fun. And the only thing I don't like about it is we don't actually see Bryan Talbot draw Superman.
Yes, but you do see that on some of the other annuals.
Yes.
Like, let me show you. If I can find it. Here we go. Bryan Talbot drawing Superman there, which is pretty cool.
Very cool.
So LaMar, did you like it?
Yeah, I thoroughly enjoyed it. For me, just seeing these kinds of things, like it took me back to when I was a little boy. And so, because, like we were talking about, it's like a very 80s sci-fi type of thing. So it kind of puts you in the mind of like, like those movies like Alien or like Predator, and just movies like, movies like that, that we grew up on and stuff. Because there's a, even though there's a lot of crazy stuff happening in those films, there's like this underlying like blue collar aesthetic, right? And so that's basically how Granch here, the bounty hunter, that's how he comes off.
Grudge Quiglow, what a name. I love it.
which is funny because it actually sounds British, right? Like it sounds like a name like that. But he has like this blue collar thing going on, like, hey, it's just about the work. I'm gonna go catch these things and get my money and go home. So it's basically he's an intergalactic dog catcher, right?
Chief animal bagger.
Yeah, see,
I like to pretend that in his language that sounds like really grandiose. But then when translated to English, it's like his job is Chief Animal Bagger.
Well, hey, if you don't speak his language, you'll never know. So, and his approach to it is just another job, right? Which is funny because when he refers to them as Kryptonians, so obviously, he knows that they're Kryptonians, so it's not like they sent him on like a mission and didn't tell him what was happening. But I kind of get the impression he didn't know what Kryptonians do or what they can do because like on their planet they don't really have powers. So when he gets there, he gets the shock of his life because he had all this detailed information about them, but they left out one thing. And that was the one thing they probably should have said, right? Like, hey, they live under a yellow sun, and this is what happens when you have that Sol 3, the sun is yellow. So this is what happens. Here you go. They left that part out because they probably knew he wouldn't have gone, right? Which is kind of what happens in these blue collar positions, right? They leave out the pertinent details, and then you're down there in the mud, and then it's too late, So there's a lot of that kind of stuff.
Planet Mud.
Yeah, on Planet Mud, right? So there's a lot of that kind of stuff in it, and that honestly, that was a big science fiction trope. Like during that time, like in the 70s and then into the 80s, that was a big kind of thing. Where you get there and it's worse than you thought it was, right? And so there's a lot of that sensibility in there, man. And it's a great story. It really, really is. And that's kind of the underpinning of it. It's just that kind of stuff. Like it's very easy for somebody to say, wow, man, I remember I was on the job, something similar happened to me. So yeah, Yeah, it's dope for that. Yeah, I think.
I love it because it shows how crazy Superman looks to somebody who has no idea what he is. Because it's like, yeah, I throw the net at this guy, and it flies through the air towards him, and he looks right at it, right, and it melts. What the hell? What the hell? And then you know what it does, Dex? It starts to take its shirt off. Only it's got more clothes on underneath. So I decide to go back to the ship because if it can melt things with its eyes, that what would it do with its navel?
I mean, that's interesting for us as well, because I mean, like, Superman is like such a part of pop culture now. Like, everyone knows who Superman is and what he can do. So just to have this outsider's perspective for us, not just in universe, in the story, but outside as well, to see how someone might see how ridiculous Superman is removed from all the sort of cultural trappings. It's yeah, it's really great.
Yeah, it is. I'm gonna tell you something that makes me think about too. Action Comics #1. Like, so think about it like where like you could replace Granch with Butch in the car, right?
Well, the guy going,
Yeah, that dude, yeah, with dude, yeah, the guy in the foreground, yeah, that was basically was the human version of him, of Granch, because he got his mind blowed out. You know what I mean? So that's but still that same kind of blue collar thing, even though those guys were criminals, right? But they were blue collar criminals. They were doing petty stuff. So yeah, that same type of sensibility. It works a lot with Superman, especially when you know his background, because his parents were blue collar. So Smallville is kind of a blue collar place. So it's just an interesting way of presenting Superman that way, especially when you don't see him. So you're literally seeing him through Granch's eyes, and that's interesting too. You have to put everything else together in your head from the stuff that that he doesn't know. So it's because so you're seeing it the way he sees it, but you're also seeing it the way you know it to be. So it's just really interesting to read a short story like that.
yeah. So, what about the second one?
Wait, before we go to the second one,
Oh,
I
yeah.
just want to say this was written in 1983, came out in the 1984 UK annual, and it literally ends with Superman blowing Granch with his super breath. And then he picks up his entire ship and throws it all the way. Granch is writing this letter while he's still on the way to the Andromeda Galaxy because he can't.
Hey, he got time.
This is a dude who's just doing his job. So I want to point out that this came out before the Crisis on Infinite Earths, where Super Dick was totally a thing.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's a little too much, Superman. That's all I'm gonna say.
Hey, he ain't kill him, though. I mean,
People really forget that, don't they? I mean, I know super dickery is like this meme, but people forget that before Christopher Reeve, especially in the 70s and early 80s, Superman was like really full of himself.
Yeah.
And it was Reeve who brought that humility back to him, and then it was a few years before that came into the comic.
Yeah.
But yeah, because Christopher Reeve wouldn't throw him to the Andromeda Galaxy.
No. There's an early Stan Lee and Jack Kirby Tales of Asgard where Thor is fighting someone who's just being a dick to him, and then he ties him to Mjolnir and throws him all the way across the galaxy just for being a dick to him. And I'm like, see, with Thor, I can see that happen.
Right. Yeah.
Superman. Surely there was another way. Poor Granch.
Funny enough, it's another annual with a great Brian Bolland cover that reprints a DC Comics Presents story with Martian Manhunter in it, where Superman has to get some sort of key or something for Warworld for Mongol because Mongol's sort of blackmailing him to do it. And Martian Man is like, no, don't take that key because you'll make things worse. And Superman's just like, out of my way, I'm Superman, I know what I'm doing. Like literally like that. And he just beats up Martian Manhunter and takes the keys.
It'd be really funny if he was like, you don't know what it's like to lose a world.
Yeah.
Yeah, and John's just sitting there like, wow.
Yeah.
Wow, I feel so sad for you and your cousin and your dog.
And your bottle full of people.
Your bottle full of people.
Yeah, just having like if I can find the relevant panel because it is very funny. Here we go. I don't know if you can see that, but I understand your position, John, and I sympathize. But don't forget whom you're talking to here. I'm Superman, remember? So why don't you just step aside and let me handle this? Believe me, I know what I'm doing. Like, or I get.
Yeah.
See, this
Yeah,
is
he
why
said-
Batman wasn't a dick pre-crisis, because Superman had that covered.
This is it, yeah. And but you wouldn't get that now, would you? You know, and this
Yeah.
is why, like, on the internet, you see people, oh, Superman wouldn't do that, and Superman wouldn't do this, and it's like, well, this Superman would. You know?
Yeah. It's funny because that was kind of like a plot point in JLA Avengers where Superman was behaving like that, but it was because some stuff was happening with these universes kind of bumping into one another, so to speak, and it was throwing things off. So it kind of highlights what you're talking about, but like when I was reading the dialogue and that stuff and the way he was talking, like referring to the people in the Marvel universe being backwards and undeveloped and all of this other kind of stuff. And even people in the book were like, hey, whoa, you know what I mean? Like, you're laying it on kind of thick, man. What's up? So...
Speaking of that, I just want to say we love you, George Perez.
Oh, yeah. We certainly do.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Second story, Paul.
Second story, I was Superman's double. It's kind of the same but different. He's still got these outsiders' perspective, but and it's still blue collar, but from a blue collar perspective. But it's very different from the first. So, LaMar, what did you think of the second story?
It's funny because I immediately thought about when I went to New York this past July, and I was only there for 3 days. So it was a first for me. It was like, my first time going to New York, my first time getting on a plane. And I stayed at an Airbnb, that was great. That was my first time doing that and stuff like that. So I kept running into these characters, though, that talk like this guy, right? The cab driver, and so, and you know how it is when you live in a place like that, and there's all different types of people in New York, but you can tell when somebody's not from there, right? Like you can just kind of tell. So I guess they figured, like, yeah, I'm gonna ham it up to this dude, he's here from out of town. So, he'll take this back home and he'll have this great story that I told him about some BS I made up on the spot, right? And so, but I kept running into people like that. And it's like, man, come on, man, come on. But, you don't want to interrupt the story because it's entertaining, right? So you just kind of let them keep going. So, which is funny. I didn't have this experience with the Uber driver that picked me up from the airport. But this guy just basically kind of let me out and was like, hey, the building you're going to right there. And he let me out in the middle of the street. You see what I'm saying? Like, we weren't even at a stop sign. He just let me out in the middle of the street and was like, there's the building right there. So so I was like, hey, I'm out, bro. No problem. So, but yeah, it was an interesting read because as I was reading it, even though this came out years ago, I was like, hey, this is kind of like what happened to me, kind of, because I kept running into these characters. So these big city characters that think that they can just get over on people all day long and stuff like that. And, they just like hearing themselves talk and stuff like that. That's a real thing. And I don't even think it's a bad thing. I just think it's interesting. Right. So just the hyperbole and stuff like that he was using, it was very true to form, and it was genuine, like, from a cultural perspective. So, he really nailed that. you know, and that was kind of like the thing that held the whole story together, you know, being able to convey, number one, that, you know, Clark is Superman, we know that, but he doesn't. And then he's obviously lying, and the lie doesn't work. But at the same time, if you don't know that it's Clark, and you don't understand that you're in the midst of a dynamic that's basically just his presence there says everything you're saying is not true, and you don't know that, and you just continue to lay it on more and more and more, and then he creates his own universe before the story's over when Clark gets out of the cab, right? So you know, that was, I don't want to use the word grounded necessarily, but I just think it was a really like human story, you know, and you know, I think telling it like this with no real like images or captions or anything, it actually made the story more powerful. Like, I think the story would be less interesting if it had a panel grid or whatever, you know, it was told like a short story like that. Just having the text there and doing it all in your head made it much more interesting for me.
I agree with that. I think the first one could have worked as a comic and might have worked better as a comic. This one works just fine as it is. I do like the first one better just because it's more in my wheelhouse, but it does feel more, this one does feel quite authentic, because we've all ridden in cabs with a driver like this. The usual thing is a driver who believes that he knows how to fix the political problems of a country.
Right.
Like, you do you, sir. You do you. But I said it, like, I'm reading it and I can totally hear a New York accent. Oh, too, buddy. Well, you'll have to speak up the New York 1930s accent, to be clear. It's very cool.
Yeah. It's like, it's not just like a cab driver thing. I think we've all had that sort of experience of like, you know, like I've worked in like shops and public facing stuff over the years, and someone you'll work with will go, "Oh, I had that so and so celebrity in the other day. Oh, they were so rude, you know." They were like, you know, that sort of instinct to bring someone down and say, "Oh, they ain't all that," you know.
Yeah. Yeah, but I believe you. I believe that. Like they'll you can go to a coffee shop or something, or like, I live in a condo, right? And apparently there are celebrities who live in my condo, although I have never met them. And people are like, "Oh yeah, she's not that pretty." I'm like,
Yeah.
Who cares?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the unsolicited factoids like that, it's kind of a part of it, you know, because once you do it, you have to make it seem like it's not a big deal after you create this huge like story that couldn't have possibly happened, right? And so when you do it, you have to make it seem like, you know, it's just, because it's just something about it. You have to end it like that to make it seem like you're above it all, right? You know what I mean? And it's like, dude, if you were above it all, you wouldn't have concocted this huge lie. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I wonder, like, if you could have a story like that these days, because Superman's become more of this sort of like sacred symbol, you know. So the idea of a story where he's described cowering on the floor, clutching a teddy bear, or whatever, like, you know, whimpering on the floor, like, I don't know, like, people wouldn't. People, like, I remember, I shared a panel in a Facebook group once from Last Son by Jeff Johns and Richard Donner, and it's the panel from like a cliffhanger of the last but one issue where Superman's kind of on his knees because he's just been slapped by someone or shot by someone, and then he looks up and like Luthor's there with all his enemies in front of him, like the Parasite and Bizarro and Metallo, and they're all lined up, but Superman's looking up at him on his knees. And I shared that panel just because it's a really cool panel with all the villains on this Superman group on Facebook. And one guy posted, "Why the F is he on his knees?" Like, it was really offensive for him to see Superman on his knees.
These people.
Yeah.
They know how to do it, don't they?
Yeah, so like, imagine if that guy saw like Superman whimpering in the corner of the White House,
Holding a teddy bear, you know.
Yeah.
You know what's funny to me? There's this whole thing here in this story about uh I could use my telescopic vision to see this brainiac guy heading towards Earth from somewhere out near Andromeda. And I'm like, did 1984 Alan Moore only know one other galaxy?
Yeah.
It's the Milky Way and Andromeda.
Yeah. He does seem to like that.
But what a great, like, I think, what a great mimic he is, though, to be writing in this voice.
Mm.
And the fact that, the fact that when you asked earlier if I would have guessed that this was Alan Moore and I said no, I actually think that's to his credit.
Mm.
Yeah, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Because it's still a good story. It's not in his usual wheelhouse, and I still liked it. So, and I wouldn't have guessed that it was him. So that's range right there.
Yeah.
Well, like Gronch or whatever his name is in the first story, it's kind of alien Alan Moore, isn't it? You can imagine his voice saying those words.
100%.
Yeah. Yeah.
You didn't tell me that it was. But but yeah, he's taken a completely different persona, hasn't he, for the second story? Like, even though the first story's an alien and the second one's a human, so I don't know what that says about Alan Moore.
He does what he calls method writing. So he actually looks at himself in the mirror and then he tries to take on the posture of the character that he's writing and everything. So the first time he had to write Etrigan, he apparently went in front of his mirror, hunched over, put his jaw out, and he was just trying to figure out how Etrigan would move and talk.
It's amazing.
I'm the son of man.
I mean, when you think of like some other writers, the extent they go for the Etrigan characterization is just some really dodgy rhyming, and that's all they do.
So sometimes he'll write a rhyme for Etrigan, and I'm like, that doesn't even rhyme. And then I realized in his accent it would.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, fine, I'll let it go.
Something like a side thing that struck me about the second story, because Ronald Reagan's in it, because he's the one who gives the cab driver the assignment to
Boo!
be yeah. Yeah, absolutely. But he must have like appeared with Superman in more comics than any other president, I think.
Well, there's Legends.
Yeah, he's in Legends. He's in Dark Knight Returns. He's in this.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure he's in another one as well. There's another one where like Superman's like, "I won't let you down, sir." It might be Millennium or something like that. So I wonder. I mean,
that's true.
Yeah. So I wonder what it was about Reagan that made people want to stick him in stories.
I have a guess. Because so there's a panel floating around the internet, and I hate it, where it's Superman and Nixon. And he's like, if I can't trust the president of the United States, who can I trust? People, that panel is fake. Okay, I hate to burst your bubble, but that originally is John F. Kennedy Jr. And the reason that they didn't use likenesses after that, which means Nixon could not have been used in anything with Superman in it, is that when that story came out, John F. Kennedy had just been assassinated. So they said we just should stop doing likenesses altogether because shit like this might happen. So in between John F. Kennedy Jr. and Ronald Reagan, there was just nothing. Now the question is, why isn't there anything after Reagan?
I'm thinking of comics in general. Like George W. Bush definitely turns up in Ultimates, doesn't he?
Mhm.
Yeah, but everyone turns up in Ultimates. Shannon
Yeah,
Elizabeth turned up in Ultimates.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's true too. Yeah.
I mean, Trump's off panel in Doomsday Clock, isn't he?
Off
Mhm.
panel.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
weird. Trump's off panel, but Putin is in it. Is actually drawn in Doomsday Clock. I wonder why that was.
Well, because Putin is not going to seek legal action against DC Comics.
That's true, yeah. They drew me in this comic. It was very bad. Very bad deal.
And
With no
Putin,
legal action.
and I think Putin on all sides, nobody likes him. So
Yeah, that's true, yeah.
so there's that. But like, why did they stick with Reagan and like they didn't? I don't even think. Oh, was Bill Clinton in the Return of Reign and Return of Superman?
Yes, Bill
Yeah.
and
Yeah,
Hillary
he
do a
was.
speech at his funeral, don't
Yeah.
they? Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah.
Okay, so it's really just why George H.W. Bush never showed up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or Jimmy Carter.
Well, that was before Reagan. So
oh yeah,
that
it
was,
wasn't it? Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah.
So, yeah.
So I think Reagan was when they stopped with the embargo and using Nixon and Watchmen.
Yeah.
Yeah, so there's that. But it just turns out, unfortunately, that the president that Superman shows up with the most is Ronald Reagan.
Yeah.
Which is unfortunate.
Well, it couldn't
While
be
we're
worse.
at it, people, getting solid dick from Iron Man is also a fake.
Yes.
Stop spreading that thing.
Yeah.
I have had to do that on Facebook. Oh, well, actually, that's not a real panel.
I do it too because people think it's legit and they're like, oh, okay, yeah, that's really funny. Linguistic shifts. And I'm like, no,
Nobody ever said solid dick.
I guarantee
Yeah.
you've never read anything from the 60s and they said that.
Yeah. As a matter of fact, I got a book here on the subject. This book is called The Language of American Popular Entertainment. You will not find the term solid dick in this book at all. I promise you, you won't. Okay? You will
That
not
should
find
be
it
a
in there.
quote on the cover of that book.
Yeah, you know what I'm saying? You will not find that phrase in this book. I promise
That's
you.
a cool book, though. That's a cool
it's
book
fly.
to have.
Yeah, it's fly. Y'all should get it. You could I've had that book a while, but you can get it for a couple of bucks, I'm sure. But yeah, it has all of this slang in it from like the early 20th century, like up until the time the book was published. You will not find that phrase in there nowhere.
So what does it do? Does it explain things like "What's up, Doc"?
I don't know if that one's in there or not. But yeah, it's great though because it has all of that early like 20s and 30s stuff that you would see in these early comics and things like that. So if you ever want to know what they're talking about in those books and in those old movies and stuff, you get that book and it'll straighten you out. I promise.
Cool. So everyone's got a book recommendation now. So getting back to with Superman's double, can anyone explain to me these teddy bears on the third page?
On the third page of what's that?
In the
it's the design.
Yeah.
Of
Like-
of the I Was Superman's double.
Yeah.
Let's have a look.
Yeah, it's
Oh.
yeah. You see it?
Like, what's up
Yeah.
with that? Look at the first 2 pages. There's nothing there.
But it's like what? It's like ticker tape or something.
It's just
isn't
ticker
it?
tape, and all of a sudden it ends with these teddy bears.
Yeah, and they have these like alternating faces, like they're not all smiling. Like some of them are like they're grimacing, and they
Is
have
that like Superman's teddy bear?
It's the tragedy and comedy mask, except it's teddy bears.
except it's a teddy bear. Like if you look at the first the one that has the illustrations on the side, the first page, look at how Superman's cuddling the bear, and look at the bear. Like the bear actually has like body language and facial stuff that it's doing. Like look at it. Like the bear's not happy about it. You know what I mean?
Why is he on his knees?
You know what I
I guess I have to be hugged. It's true though. At the risk of alienating a lot of people watching this video, the general overall Superman fandom is pretty terrible.
Yeah, I'm sorry
Yeah.
to say, but
No, it's true because they take all of the wrong lessons from the stories, you know, and they put other stuff in there that's not there, you know. But I will say that you have a lot of older people that are older than us that grew up in that time that we were talking about where, you know, Superman was engaging in a lot of misogynistic behavior and, you know, doing a lot of just despicable things because the writers were living through him, you know. So yeah, so and I think that really had a pernicious influence on the fandom in the subsequent generation, you know.
Oh, because they only focused on like the fantastical stuff and not so much on the character stuff. That's true.
Yeah. It was like they focused on the power fantasy and not so much, like you said, the characterization and stuff like that. Yeah.
That's unfortunate.
Yeah.
That's really unfortunate.
But we can see it in these stories, you know, of like a new generation of writers like Alan Moore coming along in the 80s and cutting Superman down to size and make him look vulnerable and even a bit ridiculous, you know? And
Yeah, that's the challenge in today's generation, I think, because today's
Yeah.
generation sees all of these things all at once. So there's no context. So in a vacuum, something like Whatever Happened to the Man of Tomorrow is just a really sad story.
Yeah. Yeah.
But in the vacuum, in the context of it being the end of the Silver and Bronze Age Superman, where he is being cut down to size, it's really poignant. But if you don't know that, it's just a really sad story.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, like it was like the sort of time where like people started tackling that question of, you know, people always be, oh, Superman's too powerful. If nothing can hurt him, where's the, you know, how can we show him in peril? And people like Alan Moore were answering that question by yeah.
There's a lot of stuff you could do to put him in peril.
Yeah. Give him a teddy bear.
But what do you think of this whole idea of having him not be the main character in his own books, like these two stories right there? Because I think, you know, like the Spirit was never really the main character of his own book, and that kind of thing. Like, what do you think of that kind of approach to a Superman book as an ongoing thing? What do you think that would work?
No, because I think it's good. It's good to do it, but like all the time, it would be like, I don't know. You know, you'd start thinking like, well, how does Superman feel like that about this? And it would feel like a cop out. It would feel like the writer is saying like, I can't identify with this character in any way, so I'm not even going to try. You know, which isn't what Moore was doing here.
Yeah.
But if it happened all the time, that is what it would be doing.
Yeah.
And I like the idea of, you know, it's kind of admitting, isn't it, that we human beings are so flawed and rubbish that we can never identify with this guy in any way. So his only role is to save us and occasionally give us inspirational chats on a rooftop. And we can never actually see the workings of his mind because that level of goodness is so alien to horrible humans like us. And, you know, that might be true, but it's not a particularly fun thing to think about.
Possibly.
Yeah.
That's an interesting question though, Dewey, because it's like you think about like how those kinds of books can work. Like you think about like Gotham Central, for example, right? That's a fantastic book, you know, and even though it's like it's separate thing from the Batman stories, but the whole thing, like Batman is almost never in it. But and it's an interesting take, or I mean, like even for like one book, you know, it's interesting. But for a character like Superman, I don't think it works, you know, past like you maybe could get 2 or 3 issues out of it at the most, and then you'd have to move on. just because of the way the character's set up and the way that the character works. But it's the thing that's interesting about it though is that Superman has a really strong supporting cast, right? And so, writing a story like that would be beneficial, right? You can get excellent material out of it, right? But then you end up with kind of like a Smallville type thing where it's like, okay, we've seen enough of this stuff. We want to see him in costume now, right? So, but it's an interesting question though, because just because of his main cast or his supporting cast is so strong, anytime you get to interact with them, it's great, especially when they're interacting together, with whether Superman's there or not. So I think those stories can always be told, and I'm a single issue guy. I love stories that are starting over in a single issue. So so those I could read, but I don't know if I'd want a Superman book where it's told that way, like for an extended period of time though. Yeah, I don't think
More
the
of an
character works well that
anthology,
way.
maybe.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah, you could do that, but I don't think the character's set up for that,
And he's a likable guy, isn't he? You want to see what's in his thoughts because he's a
Yeah.
nice guy,
Mhm.
It's
Yeah, you want to hang out with him. Like, why
yeah,
not?
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah.
hmm
What do you think of what do you think of the idea that we've talked about how these two characters are blue collar? What do you think of the idea that they're both less than savory personalities?
Um,
You think it says anything, or it's just like
I
don't
don't know because it's not as if Alan Moore's like Lord Snooty living in his mansion, is it? Like,
No, he comes from a very poor family.
exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So it's not as if he's sneering at the working classes, is it?
No.
But the working classes, it's not one thing. I think people kind of see being working class as like just these salt of the earth people in flat caps, or alternatively these like chavvy people who are scumbags, and neither is true. They're both ridiculous stereotypes that are untrue. You've got like all these different facets to a whole
Yeah.
class of people, and
Yeah.
you do get people who are like like we said, cab drivers who tear down the sort of elite a little bit, or
Yeah.
sort of just working class slobs who do a bit of dodgy work here and there, but ultimately just want to get the job done and don't like being misinformed about their latest job.
He turned his
Yeah.
meter off. This guy turned his meter off.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
That's a bit of super dickery, though, isn't it? Clark basically runs out without paying.
Yeah. Got out of the cab and didn't pay.
I don't know if you turned your meter off.
So, no, yeah. I think when you think about these two characters, right? When the way, like you said, Alan Moore comes from, he didn't have a silver spoon in his mouth when he was young. So when I was reading it, I didn't feel like it was a dig at like the blue collar workers and stuff. Now, but if you want to talk about the power of that, for example, like, we grew up here in the States, they would tell us that using the word ain't is improper English, right?
Same.
And they told you that too?
Yeah.
Yes. So, but the only reason
My
why
mom tells me that all the time.
Yeah. And where that comes from, it actually comes from one of Charles Dickens's books, where he's writing about the Cockney people, right, in the UK. And he's basically writing them to be like low class instead of just categorizing them as just working people, and 9-to-5ers and blue collar stuff. And that word ain't it basically comes from them. So it's a word that they used. So the upper crust people use that word and the way they talked as being, sign of their lack of intelligence. And so when they started teaching English grammar, it actually made it into the school system so that they would say, don't say ain't, because that's associated with like people who are not sophisticated and people who don't know anything. and it's associated with low intelligence. So that comes to America, and it's still being taught in schools that, you know, ain't is not proper English. But when you actually look at the syntax of English, it works just fine. You know, like there's nothing grammatically incorrect about that word. So just to speak to the power of that, and it's obvious that Alan Moore wasn't trying to do that. You know, and I think that's one of the reasons why I enjoyed it so much. You know, because like Paulie was saying, you know, working class people, you know, there's different types. I mean, you even see that like in the way unions are formed, for example, like the bread workers and the confectioners, they have a different type of union than people who do like other types of manufacturing work, or, you know, and stuff like that, because they all have like different needs, right? So it kind of speaks to that, you know, in an organized way, you know, because they're not all the same. You can't interchange union contracts like that, because even though they're working towards the same goal, they don't function the same way. So you get a lot of that kind of stuff in these two stories. Obviously, these people are coming, they, you know, one of them's a cab driver, the other one's a bounty hunter, not to mention an interstellar bounty hunter alien, right? We can even leave that part out of it. They live two different lives, but they're basically
chief animal bagger.
Yeah, you know. So, you know, it comes off really, really well. And that really happens when you know the material, right? You know, and Alan Moore is, you know, you can not like his stories or whatever, but he's a good comics writer. You know, he's one of the best at that. I don't think we can deny that. You know, and these stories that he writes like this, it's even more evident in these stories than it would be like in a longer work, you know, because you've only got a few pages to get it right here, you know, whereas you can have hundreds of pages to tell a story someplace else. It's like if you mess it up, the whole 3 pages fall apart, you know. Yeah.
So it's interesting, that sort of view of the working class people as well, you know, to view the working class as one thing. It can be quite dangerous as well, you know, because here in the UK, you've got like a lot of traditionally working class areas that have traditionally voted left-wing parties have voted the Conservative Party. You know, they've completely swapped over. And you've got like sort of middle class people like, why would they vote against their own interests, you know, and rah, rah, rah. And it's, you know, there's this sort of race to sort of understand the working class, like they're this sort of alien thing that you can find the cheat codes of. You know?
Right. Yeah. Yeah, it doesn't
And
work
it's
like
like,
that.
you know, well, if they're voting conservative, it's not because they're stupid. It's because what you're selling them isn't working. You know, it's not speaking to them, and that's not their fault. That's your fault. You know, that you've got this narrow view of what the working class are and what they want. So it could be quite a dangerous thing to
And
be
it
with.
is dangerous because the thing that the upper and middle classes like to say is like, oh, they're too dumb to get it. I was like, well, they they didn't finish school the way you did. What do you expect? Like, that's not their fault.
Yeah, it's so I don't know. Got a bit off topic there. I have. Basically,
it's what we do.
Yeah.
I mean, it works though in this case because you know, that's the perspective of the story, you know. And so a lot of these behaviors that you see in these characters, you can see it reflected in your daily life with no problem, you know. So, you know, it still kind of fits, but, you know, it was just kind of a side mission that we went on real quick, you know.
Well, another thing that I like about Herman Schwartz is the I Was Superman's double, is that he basically says a lot of the things that you would, that as a person in the DC universe, you would think that Superman does this. Like, oh yeah, I leaped a tall building in a single bound. Oh yeah, like I went over to a phone booth. Like I saw some meme. I saw somebody say the other day that in 50 years, someone's gonna make a movie where the COVID-19 pandemic ended ended one of the viral challenges and started the ice bucket challenge. Uh, because all of those things in 50 years would have come like really close to each other, and like
Mhm. They get
somebody would
smashed
just
together.
put it all together
Yeah.
and put it all and smash it all together. And
Yeah.
I feel like
Mhm.
that's what's happening here with Herman.
Yeah. He's
Yeah.
doing a lot of that. Yeah. Mhm.
Yeah, it's true. Something that just occurred to me as well about him is that the way he talks about red kryptonite and how red kryptonite is a myth. It's just something the government came up with to explain Superman's erratic behavior. It's interesting. This is like Alan Moore doing like a sort of early form of the sort of deconstruction that
Mhm.
would come later on. You know, it's like this sort of
Yeah.
this charming Silver Age thing is actually something a lot more darker and sinister, and
Mhm.
we start to see a lot more of that down the line.
Mhm.
And here it is popping up in this story, like.
That's what, yeah. So that's part of the things that he will do is like, oh yeah, that didn't exist.
Yeah, yeah.
Mhm.
Well, that thing that was quite nice is actually really scary.
Absolutely not. Good stories, Paul. Thank you for sharing them with us.
Oh, no
Yeah.
problemo. Yeah.
Yeah. I
So
really enjoyed both of them. Yeah.
they are on eBay if anybody wants to search for them. The Superheroes Annual 1984 and Superman Official Annual 1985. And there's loads of these really early 80s annuals, and they're a treasure trove of amazing art and writing.
I believe that 1985 one also has a story by the great Jamie Delano.
Yes, yes.
Mhm. Yep.
And like I said, there's Grant Morrison. They do a few stories as well. There's a Batman annual from 1985 or six, I think.
With
But that's
Gary
got
Leach. Yeah.
Gary Leach, yeah, and that's got a
1986.
fantastic Catwoman story in it, with some amazing Gary Leach art. So yeah, I recommend that.
And the 86 Superman annual also has a story by Morrison and Barry Kitson.
Yes, there we go.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very cool. We can talk
So
about those at some
let
point.
us know what you think of these stories. If you've read them, or would you like to read these stories if you haven't read them? Do they pique your interest? Let us know in the comments, and click like and subscribe to the Comics Cube, and we'll see you again soon. Thank you very much.